The reason my wife is not Muslim, she's been a feminist since I met her, is that she was repelled. She was kind of nodding along with Surah Bakra. She made a note that the enjoyment to fighting in Surah Bakra is potentially problematic. And frankly, I think that's very incisive. It kind of summarizes the misunderstandings of jihad that have perpetuated a cycle of violence that's held back the ummah. Um, Although there are contexts where it would be good, such as fighting the Zionists, to defend the innocent, not just because they're Zionists if they weren't doing what they've been doing. So obviously there's a point to that verse, but it's been applied very badly. So she was right to make a note about that. And then in Surah Nisa, it's pretty much where she got off the train. The conversion pipeline, the men being a degree over women. This is the key verse. This has been interpreted as basically meaning that God commands patriarchal dominance. And then you combine it with a lot of fabricated Umayyad hadiths that criminalize women having any autonomy, being able to exit the house, being able to say they're not in the mood to their husbands and things like this. And you can see how that got taken way too far. And then there was the infamous wife beating verse. So I've covered this a number of times. So you can take a lot of these misunderstandings in Islam that were willful and that were driven by shawwa, by lust, and also by hawa, by this willful intent to kind of construct the religion as one pleases. And so you've got the slave thing, you've got the wife beating thing, you've got the Aisha age thing, and these all create an artifice that is not only chauvinistic and repudiating feminism, but it's taking it to a level that would make um, patriarchal Christian men blush because they don't endorse the all of that. Maybe the wife beating and the marital lack of consent. This was the Catholic Church had a missive in the 20s where they said, well, it's a contract, ergo, men. There's no concept of this sort of violation in marriage. Like once you're married, it's like a free use pass for life. And then in the 70s, they came out with, well, it's a crime against love. So this is kind of what distinguishes literal Judaism of the Pharisees from the teachings of Jesus, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mercy, right? And so the Catholic Church remembered that, and but also what was going on in the 70s, like what prompted, right? You already had Vatican II in the late 60s. So the Catholic Church is, and ultimately the Freemasons and the mob and the bank, and they killed the Pope, and then they put in the other Pope, and they were going to kill him, but he let them do the money laundering. Jean Paul, that's why he got to live another 30 years, is because he played ball with the mafia. So all of this was going on in the meantime between the 1920s and the 1970s when the Catholic Church said, maybe husbands should just not abuse their wives, would be a bit more Christian. So it's not like this is deeply rooted in traditional Christianity versus traditional Islam. And then I've discussed 433 at length in a number of videos as being a doorway to realizing that God is actually challenging people with riddles. The language could have been clearer. There's definitely textual cues within the Quran alone to distinguish that this is not an instruction to beat one's wife in a problematic situation, but rather to take under a trial separation. And then you can, if you study the Injil, you can see these nuances. The Jesus Islam commandment, which is taken to the other extreme by Christians, and so I've covered that a lot. I even did a red jumpsuit apparatus in the birds video the other week. So obviously, this is something that I've contemplated and is important to me. So if we can put aside these major landmines, and then we get into the well, first I want to cover the theology. So there was a woman on History Valley the other week, Dr. Celine, um, don't remember her last name, and she was talking about this Gnostic story of Eve and how it's a recapitulation of stories about the founding of Rome and how there's this tradition of completely objectifying women in the pagan cultures. And so her position, it's a kind of refreshing when you get a critical scholar who studies Gnosticism and things like that. And they're not orthodox confessional believers in whichever religion, but then they come out and actually make a nuanced point in favor of the God of the monotheistic tradition, which is that God is giving women a way out from this idea of men just having the power and them being sculpted by power, which is ultimately this sort of Nietzschean concept within paganism. And it's also in the Judeo Christian Islamic tradition in some venue, but that the deeper wisdom is no, right? And likewise, this idea you see with the feminist women, a lot of times they reject outright the Abrahamic tradition. I mean, it's named after a guy. It's the father, the praised father, right? The praised Ab, right? So it's inherently patriarchal, even the name Abraham. And his situation with the Jews versus the Ishmaelites is about this this bondswoman not being given equal rights as a wife. So that's a way of saying going to this polygamy thing. And why is there this separate category of fiqh in the Quran regarding marrying slave women? It's like, well, you don't have to pay them a mahar as consideration to enter the contract. The mahar is that they attain freedom. This is inherent, not a priori, but if, because they're in this contract, it's a different contract than when they were just a non-married slave, and that contract does not include conjugal rights and violation uh, privileges for the master. This is the big misunderstanding, and you can go back to Deuteronomy. There's a few verses about that. That if you find a captive woman beautiful and you marry her, and then you tire of her, or you divorce her, and then she's free and you can't resell her, and she has the same rights as everyone else. And this is the same thing with the polygamy thing. Um, it's not that men have a right to cheat and lie and do whatever. That Allah loves those who are fair dealing and will punish those who are not. If you read the Quran holistically, these things come into force. So there's a lot of this talk, which, when you consider it geopolitically, it's from the same guys who are essentially speaking from a place of weakness, and that they wish that they were the Ottoman Empire, or they wish that they were Salahuddin, but they're not. They're YouTubers. Maybe they have 6 or 7 figure follower counts, but they're ultimately YouTubers. They don't even operate their media propaganda on platforms owned and created and operated by Muslims, because the Hanbalite influence on Islam has faced that kind of ability, and it was left to the Knights Templars as the successors of the Mutazili to wake Christianity up. So that was the civilization that happened to get free of shirk and get smart first, at least. But now maybe the Muslims can catch up. And ultimately, this is the thing: is that when a guy is sexist on the internet, that's like it's like begging the question. And when a guy is sexist in a marriage, well, there's a practical context there. Somebody's already been interested enough to, get overly invested in him, and then are we going to have more kids? Are you going to work? Am I going to be the only breadwinner? How are we going to do this? These are important questions that need to be discussed, and there's a lot of room for variation. But when, even in this pragmatic context where it's actually relevant to talk about, when a man is pleading sexism and leveraging faith as the the rhetorical lever in that debate, it's not he's not actually strong, and he's not actually coming from a place of pious wisdom either. It's a sign of weakness. So this is what's funny about sexism, is that if you were actually this big strong man who had the merit to lead, you would gravitate that through your patience, through the focus of your words. You wouldn't need to get into a theological debate and try to become this sort of anti philosopher, like sort of like a Jordan Peterson. And even Jordan Peterson's could be he could be more sexist. Like I think Jordan Peterson's an improvement over a lot of these guys. So it's this is the paradox. But then likewise, it's not like feminism per se is inherently part of Islam any more than Marxism is, or Hegelianism is, or any other ideology. And a lot of Muslims will then say, well, this is modernism, this is Western, but they're not educated on the continuity between the time of the golden age of Islam and the present. So, what I understand is that all of these ideologies, to some extent, have traces of Islamic influence through the guidance of Allah, mashallah. But it's through all these secret passageways in history to get around the various prideful taguts that have influenced history. So it's not really known to a lot of people, even people who are more educated than those people who use these. Oh, but that's a Western thing. That's secular. It does. No, it's all integrated. It's all one reality, right? So so then when you take that in mind, and you consider that also there's many waves of feminism. So second wave feminism, like Simone de Beauvoir criticizing Muslim women, so she ends up being a little bit Islamophobic, but she wrote this in the 50s. It's different from third wave feminism, which is somewhat different from fourth wave feminism. Third wave feminism is where you get more of this goddess energy, sort of reactionary theology to drape the feminine mystique. Feminine Mystique was a book in the 70s, which was more second wave. But so my wife, for instance, despite being a creedal feminist, happens to be a hobbit, as she puts it. She likes homesteading, and she likes baking, and she likes gardening, and she likes doing all these things. And she thought she would like having a lot of children, but then she had one child, and he's been pretty intense. So now she wants to do a career. So I've just respected these things, and it's been running like a trad marriage, but with feminist software under the hood. But the feminist software can emulate the trad marriage, right? So you can consider that feminism is to some extent a reactionary ideology, which has this reactionary fervor because of the historical context it's in. It's coming from a place of being the underdog. And then we get the women's suffrage. This would be like your first wave feminism. I don't know. Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein would be like zero with wave feminism. But what about Hypatia? What is that? She's like negative one wave feminism. There's the thing is that this kind of a woman was Hypatia was the astronomer, and I think she was like a Neoplatonist who was killed by Christians. Aronofsky made a film about her. She lived in Alexandria in the 400s or the 300s. I don't recall exactly. So Rachel Wise does a good job in that role, and obviously Aronofsky is biased and he hates the Catholic Church and so on. But who doesn't? Well, they become like Buddy Jesus, like in Dogma, since that movie was also prescient. But in a way, the reason the Catholic Church has become cooler, like I noted with their transition between the 20s and the 70s, is because they've been guided by natural theology, which is in the Quran. And that's why they're cooler towards Muslims than like evangelical types like David Wood, mashallah. So there's guidance in a lot of angles, even if it's imperfect. So theologically, so I'm kind of going back and forth between them, but maybe that's keeping this more interesting. Theologically, whether you want to invert the hermeneutic on the Genesis story or you want to take the patriarchal one, there is no name of Allah in the Quran for the masculine one, right? Like Allah is transcendent of gender because Allah is transcendent of everything, including being and non-being. If you want to go out as far as the Ishmaeli theology or some or Ibn Arabi or sort of neo Mutazili, you could take that position. So if Allah is beyond being and not being, like Allah can't not exist because Allah can't exist. Allah just is beyond existing and not existing, right? So well, but that doesn't those are nonsensical statements. Well, then how would Allah being masculine or feminine be sensible either? If we can't even nail down the ontological status of Allah because Allah is the precipitator of ontology itself, right? Um, so hopefully this theological insight wakes you up, and indeed that in addition to trying to incrementally levitate women's rights from where they were in the Jahiliyyah through the Quran's time, there's this question of like, is this now in the 600s the codified status quo for all time until Judgment Day? Is there room for reinterpretation and improvement? So the Ismailis would say yes, and modernists who are kind of like Mutazili's without the deep Akida and Batini integrations would say yes. Salafists would say no, that we rely on the ijma of this is all bida. You can't women's rights is bida. You can't do it. It's not what they're. It's got to be like how it was then, right? And then the funny thing is, they do like segregated masjid entrances, and the women are praying in the basement with the pipes leaking or whatever, and then this is a bida. This is not how they did. They didn't. First of all, they didn't have a lot of real estate. They didn't have back entrances in the Medina mosque, masjid, and the time of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. So that's a bida. Like they didn't. They didn't even put up a veil to separate the. They did segregate the men and women, so you're not praying right behind. The man isn't like seeing the woman's backside when he goes into sujud, right? So there's a sense of like, of course, we're trying to stay focused and not have a wandering gaze in the middle of salah, um, in the middle of the salah and jama'ah. But like, they didn't even put up a veil, and so Mufti Abu Layth has some good videos about that. And men and women, what's called free mixing. Oh, this is haram. You can't be chatting with women. Look, folks, like if we're gonna be halfway decent Muslims, we ought to be able to chat with each other and not be inappropriate. And this is something that Christianity is adapted to, and so too with Muslims. And then women are afraid of marrying a guy who's going to beat them and justify it scripturally, or who's just going to like make their lives into a gulag. So they want to talk to a guy. So if that's free mixing and that's haram, then it's quite problematic. But the truth is, this is how people would move quickly. They would free mix briefly, and they would inquest for a meeting with the wali, usually dad, and then they would go and have a tea or whatnot, and yay or nay, and then get married and then fall in love later. But the vetting process now, women have more power to choose their mates, right? This is the beauty of dating sites. They have a lot of problematic aspects. They make things more material and materialistic and so on. But you can aggregate with big data which particular type of person you like, not only in their appearance but in their temperament. A lot of the Muslim marriage sites, they get into the nuances of how moderate are you, which sect or sub which madhab are you in. There's actually a lot of sub variations, and you can tailor for that, right? That's the beauty of it. But also that it gives women easy optionality. You don't have to fear any kind of intimidation or even social stigma for rejecting a man. You can simply not click on their thing. You know, you don't like their face. It's easy. Or you oh, I like his face. I could see myself with that guy. Sure. What's his profile say? Does he exhibit any taste, any wisdom, any piety? Is it something gross? Is it And then there's all kinds of nuance, and the optionality becomes so cheap that women can be picky. And then, of course, women being picky creates an effect of generally delaying the average age of marriage, but maybe increasing within that cohort of auspicious mate selectors, increasing the success rate of the marriages and also the quality when they're successful. And also, women can get divorced more easily. So, even though the Quran permits women to ask for divorce and it orders men to grant the huri, um, that usually they have to sue for hula. They have to go to the Sharia board. So if you're in Pakistan, they're just not going to give you the divorce. If you're in Luton, they will, generally speaking, right? So this is also a cultural bootloader parameter that changes the reality for women. And since speaking of Luton, there's this fella Matty Tajani that I think is a good analysis point here. So Matty is certainly very sexist, and he often shames women for like not wearing hijab, or they do wear hijab but they're 30 and they've gotten the medical degree, and they're just like not feeling getting married. And this is the feedback I get from a lot of sisters, especially on the Qurana side, is that they're like, well, can I even marry a Sunni guy? Aren't they mushriks? And I'm like, well, no, I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I refer them to Khalid Chronic Islam's channel, and for more meat on why we don't think it's so black and white. And it kind of depends on the guy, but if he is like a real mushrik, then you're gonna feel it, you know. So be careful, and here's how you can filter. This is the advice they give. And then they say, well, I don't even know if I'm going to do this. And maybe they're 21, they got plenty of time, but maybe they're 28, maybe they're 32, and they're just not that and you know, you would think, if you're coming from this sort of Andrew Tate or Sneeko perspective, that as a man you're going to convert to Islam so you can seek refuge from the feminism and the LGBT, and these women only want to have one or two children. Oh, they want to have a career. I need to find me a proper woman. And then if you so maybe you're that's part of your motivation. Maybe you have more pure motivations that are in the mix, but everybody converts for a mix of reasons, right? And then you convert, and then you find out, oh, actually, like, it's like all of these Muslim marriages, like, yeah, there's some statistical skews, but we're having a lot of the same problems. And sure, like, if you marry a Syrian who's in Turkey, doesn't have permanent residency, needs a come up, or a Palestinian living in Sinai, or etc. You know, or you go to Iraq, and maybe you can marry a 15-year-old in Iraq if you want. Like, a lot of girls get married at 14, 15 there, and then you go, well, now I'm gonna have, now I'm gonna get my a proper trad woman. It's not like these UK Muslims who expect things. Um, and this is a big reason why there's this weird creep to try to defend the child marriage. Maybe not child, maybe not like we're gonna marry 10-year-old girls, but like they want to marry like 16-year-old girls. Like, you got 22-year-old Hanbali guys on social media. They're like, oh yeah, 18's too old for me. But they're not like going for under 16. So it's not like biologically horrific, but why is that? Why is that there this preference? Why would a 40-year-old guy try to marry like a 19-year-old? Like, for me, like, I'm pushing 40. I would For me, the cutoff is you have to be born maybe on the date of 9/11. So if you were born on the 12th of September, it's no good. And even then, I'm like thinking more late 20s, right? Like, I want somebody who has some, maybe they've been divorced or widowed or something like this, and they know what a marriage is like, and they can have experience the contrast and feel confident in their choice. They've gotten a degree, they've done something, just something, and that they're not filled with fantasy, right? But I think this is wisdom. But why would men want to prefer like such a strong skew towards the younger women? It's because they want the naivete, they want the blanks, they want the tabula rasa, they want to be able to program her to be their little trad bunny. And then, so I've also met some women who have burned out on the B side of that. I befriended a woman briefly. She never had a friend. Maybe this is a sin I wasn't sure about. So I don't know if I should be your friend because I'm not sure about the fic. This was last year, but I was her friend. We chat sometimes, just over Reddit, and she got married when she was 20. So this is not crazy young. It's a reasonable age to get married. The guy was like 1 or 2, 3 years older, but then he was yelling at her like on their wedding night because he wanted her to change positions, and she wasn't like doing it fast enough because she's new to this whole thing. And he's like, you have to do what I say, I'm the man. And that was when she knew that she was in trouble. But she didn't try to get out, right? They're from Egypt, they went to the UK. So now she got 5 kids and she's 36. and she wanted to have an abortion with the fifth pregnancy. And then she went to the clinic, and then she had this like Blue Valentine scene type moment where she's like, "Oh no!" Like she came close to doing it, but then she was like, "I don't know, like I gotta have this baby." And she runs out of the clinic and she calls him up. She tells him everything. I've been unhappy, I'm having a fifth child. I went to get. And you know what he said? You know what this, you know what this caballero, this paragon of Fatua said to her. He said, and Allah forgive me if this is backbiting, but I'm trying to make an important point here. He said, "Why are you telling me this?" So, we've raised man to have zero or marginal a mole of atoms worth of emotional intelligence. And so to this guy's computer, this is basically he's like a human, sort of robot. He's like does not compute. Like, how is this information germane? Well, I don't know. Maybe this is your wife and she's unhappy, and maybe now that you know that and that she's being driven to these lengths, you can try to do things. But I don't think he got that far, because it's like, why would I? And it's sort of like, if you're a 30 or 40-year-old guy and you don't know calculus, I think that's forgivable. And I tried to do calculus, and I'm a pretty smart guy. I did calculus in college, and I was like, because I didn't really learn it in high school in the AP class, and then I dropped out of it. And I got through derivative, but integral was too much for me, so went into the humanities, which was probably a mistake. But okay, so I paid for that. I paid the price for that by hiring programmers over 2 decades. Um, but if you don't know algebra and you're 40, that's because you didn't care to know algebra. You didn't think it was important. Like, algebra is not that hard. And this is kind of where the bar should be set. And then I think the feminist discourse has maybe been too hard on young men, because it's like, no, you need to be like amazing. You need to be such at a high standard of emotional intelligence, and plus you need to make all the traditional stuff too. So then guys are like, it's too much, I can't do it, and they get into these reactionary, right? Because feminism was reactionary, but then it built up dialectical momentum, and then you get like, I'm a dark enlightenment dude, or I'm a Salafist. That's like the Aki cell, you know. It's like, I'm just gonna go and be a passport bro. But then you become a passport bro, and you go to Latin America or the Philippines as a non-Muslim, or as a Muslim you go to Pakistan, or you go to Turkey or something, and then you find out, like, basically that intelligence is mimetic and viral, and that women acquire it, and then you have to talk to them, and even if they're inculcated to suppress their feelings, and it's a problematic thing. And then, objectively, like, I saw this woman who, when she was 15, she was on Disney Channel, and then she was 20, she was making pop songs and getting multi-million views on YouTube. And then when she was 25, she was doing this Oxford MIT circuit to learn fintech or something. And now she's 31, and she's got a company shooting internet satellites into space, man. I mean, and then you say, well, but she's very privileged, this California, USA, Disney track and so on. Okay, well, there's this other woman who is running for the presidency of Suriname, and her father was a wealthy businessman who was assassinated, and then through fraud and conspiracy, all of their real estate was taken away, and they had no money. And then she had to, like, just from this legacy of like having a father who was like, I'm a smart guy who makes money, this is how you can do it, until she was 13, and he was murdered. And then it's like, she's like, well, now I'm 15 and I'm gonna start a company. She did. She made like $1 million revenue company when she was 15, and then she started an import export company when she was 20. I mean, like, women who are like way more successful than me, because I was this privileged, punk. Like, I could have been way more successful in life, right? That's part of why I became a Muslim, is that I was failing and I was self-sabotaging, and then God broke me down and built me back up again. So now I'm kind of a winner because I've got the discipline. But it was like, this is what they call male privilege and white privilege and all these other privileges. It's actually this is why immigrants come to the United States and they outcompete, people who are children of medical professionals. It's because they didn't feel like they had to go and found like $100 million company, So they just kind of get a B in life, and that's fine. So, like, objectively, women are adding to the equation by facilitating their intelligence, and then this does complicate um, getting along, because it's the same thing with like organized labor. If people are capable of negotiating, then you're gonna have to negotiate, and that takes time and thought, and then there's trade-offs involved in them. And this affects how you raise children. It can affect it in a positive way, or it can affect it in a negative way, because you can lose the cohesion in the faith, right? But there's certainly a way that you can have the cohesion in the faith and cohesion in the family negotiation. um, but, like, in my case, for example, I've been marginalized by women that I tried to have families with, and I was suffered parental alienation, and sort of this HR economy matriarchy thing, kind of bit me. But nonetheless, I tried to do the right thing and be supportive of them getting out of Argentina and all that jazz, because it's what's good for the kids, it's what's good for them, and I supported them in their pursuit. So I've been in an interesting dialectic in my own personal life, where I've been between this reaction and the re-reaction, and so on. And like I said in the clear pill video, ultimately, because I was sort of doing this synthesis of transcending the gender duality that Islam is all about philosophically. It's about transcending duality, and that's tawhid, right? And if you get fixated on one or the other, that becomes like a form of shirk, or becomes a tagut, and misguides you. And so I had the clear pill versus instead of the red pill, right? And how basically ultimately marriage is an opportunity. It's the tarika that's open to most people, um, and that allows you to experience fana incrementally through the challenges of it, and that it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's an opportunity to earn hasanat. So as a Muslim, you should be focused on that. Um, and so it's getting a little long in the tooth. Yeah, I saw a woman who, the majority of the converts to Islam are women. And so this is a meat and potatoes input output problem that we need to contemplate. This is the opportunity. The problem is the churn that follows. So you have about 75% of the converts are women, right? It's not like Andrew Tate, reactionary, like, oh, I'm going to get, like, this is where I can get the trad wives, by praying Fajr and growing a beard, and then I can get a trad wife. Like, there is reality to that, and that's actually that's been a little bit of a motivator to me, because I wanted to have more children, and I wanted to stay in control, not because I want to dominate, but because I like being the provider. But then I was like, oh, I need to, like, get my business successful and actually have the money, or it's completely irrelevant. So I'm gonna, inshallah, I'm gonna have something to do there, and do more videos about that in the future. And I want to help the fellas. There's a lot of fellas who have, like, no experience with women, and they're in a marriage where they're actually being a pretty good husband, and they're praying Fajr, and they're providing, and they're trying to be emotionally available, and their wives just don't care about their needs, or they don't care about intimacy, and they don't even because they've been such good Muslims, they don't know how to talk to women, right? So, like, I'm sympathetic. Like, this is kind of the red pill angle. This is how these guys used to market to men. It's like, don't you want to have this power? I'll teach you. It's through emotional manipulation. Well, there's a better way to do it, and just saying, well, just be yourself. That's, like, kind of what it is, but it's you can get more in detail about it. But anyways, so that's for the future. For the women, it's like, and I saw this white lady in America who reverted, or converted rather. Reverted is more like your parents were Muslim, and then you had your, like, 18 to 24 or 22 phase, where you kind of drank beer and partied and stuff, and had a girlfriend or boyfriend, and then you reverted. You decided to get serious about Islam, right? So this is like a very modern thing, that you convert to other religions, but this is the real religion. So you're reverting to the fitra. Just say, she converted to Islam. She married a guy who gave khutbah at the masjid and was, like, very proper. And then he got her pregnant right away. He beaten her because it's this, like, lock her down kind of thing. And I saw another guy on the Muslim. So if you hang out on the Muslim marriage subreddit, you really learn a lot, and it's very insightful, not just for like how to have a better marriage. Of course, you can get into the gossip aspect of it. You can get horrified by it and not want to get married. I see posts like that on the Muslim marriage. But you really, if you want to really like try to get better at advising people and helping the ummah, it's a really insightful place to go. And it's all anecdotal, but there's enough volume of posts there that you can start to see statistical patterns. Um, but here's an anecdote. This one guy was like, "Oh, my friend married this convert, this American woman, and she's too girl bossy. And what do I do?" And on, um, it's I see mostly it's more men being naughty on there but with the women, it's usually that the men are not satisfied in the marriage. They're only being intimate like once a month or something like that, which is really once a month is not even maintenance sex to me. Like once a week is maintenance. Um, and healthy is like at least 2 or 3 times a week. But everybody has different tastes. That's another thing that, like, irrespective of like how do you talk to women in terms of how do I game them into wanting me, and it's like, well, if you're attractive, it's gonna be easier, and it's not just outwardly; it's also how you manifest your newer and how you carry yourself. But then also is like, how do you talk to women? Like, how do you actually like? Don't tell me how to get into a one night stand or how to get into a romance where I can, oh, I got a girlfriend or I got a new wife. If you do it the Muslim way, you just shotgun the wedding. You just do it really fast. No, it's like after that wears off. Now what? Now we have to be alive together for like 50 years or 40 years or something. Maybe one of us dies. Maybe we get divorced, but that sucks. How do you do it? You got to talk. You gotta get it. You gotta be realistic. Well, I don't have any experience. I don't even know what. Okay, well, you need to figure out what you want religiously, what you want materially, what you want in terms of reproduction, what you want in terms of intimacy, frequency. What do you like? What are the get into the nitty gritty there. Where are we gonna live? And you should. These are conversations that can be had in a fast courtship process, and that you advance quickly to making the nikah happen. And it's like wham bam, like we strategically pre agreed to a lot of things, and then you can change your mind later, but that's like you have that at least that consensus as a baseline to work off of. So what does feminism have to do with that? Well, it's in a sense there's this idea that feminism means egalitarianism, and actually it depends on which particular iteration of feminism your frame is on. And also, what does egalitarianism mean, right? So this is negotiated in a lot of variations of leftism, which merits its own video, where like you've got a worker co-op and we elect the manager based on merit, right? So that seems like pretty egalitarian, and then we like vote again every year or something, and he can like lose the position. But we don't really see those kinds of firms doing the best. Usually there's like a great man type figure. So even the guy with the long hair who gave everyone a raise to $70,000. So that's a very egalitarian company, and he reports how everybody had more kids and they were able to get into mortgages instead of renting, and everybody was happier and the company was more productive and they went on to make great profits, and it's and he recommends it to everybody, and I like that guy. And I've actually tried at a lower salary base because I'm in the developing world. I hire people in the developing world, but I've tried not making everyone have equal pay exactly, but make keeping the band close-ish, like plus or minus 30%. Um, and I hire like a female developer and like try to make sure that she's getting comparable pay to the rest of the guys. Right? Because you kind of get what you pay for with these things. People have built-in incentives, right? So it's the same thing with marriage. But what the Quran, getting back to the Quran, this degree, it's not 10 degrees. It's not, I'm the Shah and this is my harem, right? Even in polygamy. Like polygamy is actually a lot of work. Like if you're going to do it right, and if you're not, you're actually going to pay for it on Judgment Day, right? But there's a lot of bad advice these guys give that they make that seem like it's a package. But anyway, um, no, you have to you have to lead with justice, and it's only 1 degree. So what is that degree? It means I'm responsible for providing. So I'm like Walter White out here, like hustling the meth lab, but that's a moral compromise, right? But that was his whole psychology. Gustavo goes, "What does a man do? A man provides," and he's playing to like this need, right? But also it was realistic. Like Skylar was not about. Well, Skylar did go back and work with Ted, and then she had an affair with Ted and all this jazz. But then Ted had IRS problems, and she was, you know, yeah, there's that whole side plot. So actually, there's an interesting dialectic there, and then if you compare that with Kim Wexler in Better Call Saul, like everyone hated Skylar because she was written very kind of like 2 dimensionally. Um, but and if you're like a proper feminist, you're going to generally empathize with Skylar. But it's easier to if you're kind of in the middle, or if you're sexist, to be like, oh, Skylar's the worst, right? But then like Better Call Saul was a much better show in terms of the writing, and Kim Wexler is a much more 3 dimensional character, and she's actually like it's very clear when she's like, no, let's keep scamming people because she likes it, and it's a much more beautiful love story actually, right? Like the Skylar like Skylar Walter White is like not really a beautiful love story. It's almost like you could even do without her in the show. She's fundamental catalytically to the causation of the plot, but she's not a beloved character, right? But Kim Wexler is, right? And so there's this feedback loop, right? And this is why the Quran says that we created mates between you and placed between you Rahman and Rahim, so for those who would contemplate, right? So there's a Batini wisdom in this. And this is the tariqah of marriage. And so it is possible to reconcile the egalitarian phenomenology of feminist theory in various forms and not objectifying women, but subjectifying women. And then in this subjectivity, there is a path of tariqa. There's a sirat al mustaqim. There's a straight path. There's a way. There's a better or worse way for man to deal with that subjectivity. And yet, the Quran is designating that he's in the point position, and it could is there modularity for this in the Quran, because then we're just focusing on like this degree verse, right? Well, there are if statements in place regarding, for instance, 433, the infamous Nashuz verse. Um, so if the woman has her own wealth, like with, for instance, this is a classic thing that comes up, Hadija, um, radiallahu anhum, that like it would not have been appropriate for the prophet to kind of pull rank on her and start giving her the cold shoulder, because she was actually funding him, right? And they say she was like 15 years older. It doesn't really check out with the biography of how many children they had, uh, making her 40 at the marriage. She's probably more like 28 or 30, and he was just a few years younger. And this is also fine. And this is a realistic way out for all these 20-year-old incel bros who just don't qualify to get married to somebody younger. And then there's this epidemic of women in their 30s who want to have a child. They have money, and maybe they have a car or a house, or they have a degree, they have a good job, or something like this, and they can do a mizyar or nikah, and they can make that arrangement where he doesn't have to pay for everything, basically, but he still should pay for like the food, like just feed the woman, like like oh food, like there's something primal about this, right? So this is part of the fitra, and because she'll feel resentful if he's like paying nothing, and then it's like, oh, I'm just married to this young kid who maybe gets me pregnant, and he's cute and stuff, but it doesn't feel the same as this kind of like, oh man, my man. And this is kind of the straight vibe. This is one dimension of marriage, is this feeling of like, oh, you're so delicate and feminine, and I hold you in my arms, and you're like, oh, I can trust this guy, and he makes me feel safe. But this is not, so you can have like a really simple marriage where you kind of like each other, and you kind of are in and out of love on this dimensional basis, and it can work. But then there's this other dimensional basis, which is this intersubjectivity thing, that degrees of feminism, even without going 50-50 egalitarian, which can be problematic, right? And I don't think that is being prescribed in the Quran, but there's flexibility in it. So it could be 60-40 the other way, for example. The Mizyar older woman could be 60-40, and then it can shift. Or it happened with my father and my mother, that she was kind of like the trad younger woman. She was like 6 years younger. And then he funded her to go and get her master's degree and become this big cheese. And she took over the power in the marriage incrementally over the years. And it was like a flip that occurred. It was like a pole shift that occurred. Um, and she was good at kind of trying to keep him feeling like he was in control. So this is a very interesting, because my father was like not so sexist, but he is, he's like this trad Catholic guy kind of, right? So that was an interesting, a nuanced example for me of how these power dynamics can evolve over the course of a multi-decade relationship. Um, so going back to brother Maddie, like Maddie seems like this poster boy of sexism, and he goes out and he's like 35 now, I think, but he goes out and he does like UFC training, and he's got like a six pack. Like, he's aged better than I have. Like, and I haven't aged terribly, but if I was in his position, what I would be bringing to the table to make, like, for instance, a polygamy setup attractive and compelling for the trade-offs that it entails would be like, obviously, some amount of money, and that I'm kind of, I'm different. Maybe the feminism, you might say, that I have would be like flavor that I'd be bringing to the table, and the intellectual dimension, so on. But Maddie's got the six pack, and he's got that like cocky, macho, strong, dominant